All right. So this is week seven's course content on early adolescence. And as we go through this material, I want you guys to kind of keep in mind that this is a period of great change for individuals. And the changes occur along the whole spectrum of a person's being, from their biological changes, their physique, their cognitive changes, how they think, and rationalize, their emotional changes psychologically, socially, of course, are huge changes present, as well as spiritual. We will not really get into the spiritual aspect this week. We'll touch on it more in middle adolescence or late adolescence, I should say, next week. But keep in mind that this is really a stage at which there's a lot of spiritual change as well, and that comes a lot with the cognitive and social changes that are being experienced. So we'll talk about that, but probably more next week. So the objectives for this section of the material are to talk about the physical, the cognitive, and the social changes that occur during early adolescence. In terms of Habinghurst's developmental task theory, a lot of the changes here revolve around gaining independence from the parent and kind of beginning to cling more to social roles, or social groups, I should say. So, in terms of relationships, they're beginning to identify themselves more with who they are around at school, teammates, social groups, things of that nature, whereas the parents are beginning to kind of take more of a sideline role. That's not to say that the parents do not have a role in this age group, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. But keep in mind that there is a huge peer role that is assumed at this age, and in addition to the physical changes that are occurring, there are also changes in how they view themselves socially, morally, things of that nature. So they're developing ethics, and they're learning how to be socially responsible. So getting a job, things like that. And that plays into the economic independence that you see here. So, and the preparation for occupations and for marriage and family life. So it all kind of is beginning to snowball. Childhood was bringing them to this point, and now that they are kind of at a point where they can be a little bit more independent, they're assuming greater and greater roles in preparation for early adulthood. So, broken down into major themes, you see things like physical maturation, the development of formal operations, which we'll talk about in just a minute, emotional developments, social developments, as well as sexual developments, and not necessarily meaning that they are going to engage in sexual relations. However, this is them becoming more familiar with themselves as a sexual being. So, if you can recall back to your particular adolescence, you probably can recall physical changes that probably occurred from height spurt to the development of pubic and axillary hair, onset of menses, voice changes, growth of the genitalia, and general physical maturation into in terms of muscle development or facial features, things of that nature. Now, in terms of the physical and sexual development of young adolescents, I almost said teenagers, young adolescents, there are certain things that play a role in this. So, hormonal changes and the resulting onset of menarche or spermarchy. Percentages of sexually active youth are actually declining. in some cohorts. In other cohorts, such as perhaps, for example, African American cohorts, uh, and, um, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, uh, some I believe urban cohorts also have a higher rate of sexual intercourse at a younger age. Um, so there are differences in intercourse onset. So that's what I would like for you to pull from this. And your book goes into a greater depth as to the various demographics of that. So what are some factors that impact onset of sexual intercourse? Um, well, personal factors and familial factors are the two big categories here. So in terms of individual factors, you're looking at things like, what is their moral standing on this? Do they take a pledge? Are they a religious adherent? Um, it's a cognitive thing. It's more about saying, okay, I'm choosing as an individual to lead a life of virginity. But in addition, you see people with higher GPAs, so people who would be considered perhaps more intellectual or more academic, remaining celibate for a longer period of time. And then you have individuals who appear younger. Now, keep in mind, at this age, appearances mean a lot. And so at this point, teenagers are wanting to appear to be adults. They're wanting to shed their childlike ways, essentially. And so they're leaning more towards more mature looking individuals. So you see people, young people, for instance, if their breasts are developed at a much younger age, you will see them becoming a focus of sexual attention by young males. Or if somebody is particularly athletic at a young age, maybe they will, and they're a young man, perhaps they will be a focus of attention for young females. But in addition, you've got family factors, and this comes in the form of perceptions as well as expressions by the parent. So, for instance, if the teens perceive that parents disapprove of being sexually active early, you're going to see them kind of hold back. Because while the parents are kind of taking more of a sideline role with their children at this point, they are still influential. And this is something that if they come to us for counseling, we really need to express to parents and say, hey, you are still a voice for your children. And you have a certain sway in certain areas with them. But in addition, and see, that's more of the teen's perception. The parents may not actually, have a problem with their child having intercourse, but it's the teen's perception and how they are interpreting their parents' behaviors and words that actually makes the difference. Now, if the parents also express a disapproval for adolescent contraception, and notice I said express. So up here you've got the perception, down here you've got the expression. So parents actually have to express disapproval for adolescent contraceptive use. And you might think to yourself, well, why does that, inhibit sexual behavior? Well, think about this. Perhaps if an adolescent hears from their parents, oh, go just use a condom, or just make sure you're on birth control, that gives the teen a sense of, okay, the boundaries are wider than I thought that they were. And I have license to be able to go out and do these things. My parents don't care. And so intercourse may occur at a younger age at that point. But it's important in these, with regards to parental influence, it's important for the child to be connected with the parent. Excuse me. Because if the child has an insecure attachment to their parent, or the parent doesn't really express a level of concern, or is passive, or whatever. We've talked about different parenting styles before. then the child is not going to internalize these messages quite as easily or as well. Excuse me. Got a tickle in my throat. Um, so, in addition, the connection with parents comes as well as in areas of such as shared activities with the parents, and that relates back to the connection there, as well as the parents giving clear messages. So if the parent is kind of ambivalent or doesn't really know what to say, they're uncomfortable with talking about sex, excuse me again, then the child is not going to have a clear sense of boundaries. So if a parent comes to us asking about, how should I approach my child about sex, when should I do it, we can kind of develop an action plan for them, with them, I should say, and kind of help them understand when, where, how, what to say, things like that. So those are things to think about if a parent comes to you for counseling about these things. So in terms of Piaget's theory, we are now at the top of the stairs. All right, we've made it. Now we're in formal operations. Now we have mastered areas such as hypothetical thinking, experimentation that comes with the hypothetical thinking. We're now able to kind of project, okay, if I anticipate this will happen, now I'm going to test to make sure that that's true. Whereas prior to that, children in concrete operations have a difficult time kind of projecting a hypothesis and figuring out how to test it. They're able to combine different levels of thinking. So in terms of if you give them a moral test, a test of morals or something of that nature, they're able to consider various levels of moral rightness or moral judgment in order to solve the problem at different levels, as well as deduction. They're able to kind of take in and make a hypothesis as to how something will happen. So deduction and hypothetical kind of play into one another. So in terms of Piaget's theory, we are familiar, I'm pretty sure, with the concept of formal operations because guess what? We are in formal operations. We have mastered formal operations at this point of our lives. At least I hope we have. So we are able to think at an abstract level. We are able to have ideals for ourselves and be able to say, you know what? I believe that this should be, and therefore I'm going to live my life as boom, boom, boom. And have some level of moral guidance, self-imposed moral guidance to ourselves. We think in logical terms. It's not so concrete anymore. It's more, okay, so perhaps A does not equal B, but A still equals C. I'm not entirely certain what an example of that would be, but I mean, they're able to kind of manipulate different levels of thought in order to solve problems. But the thing about this stage, what comes with this sort of abstract, idealistic, logical thinking is a level of egocentrism. They are very peer-oriented at this age. And so with this new abstract level of thought comes a feeling that they are under scrutiny because they're now able to think, what do I look like to somebody else? And project themselves into that other person's mind and imagine what they may look like. So it's not necessary, even though they are abstract and idealistic, sometimes the logical part kind of is shaky still. And that leads to sort of an egocentric sort of, oh, I'm on stage, or I am being watched by everybody. And so they create this personal fable for themselves in which they are preoccupied with their own thoughts. They are deep thinkers at this point because all of a sudden a whole world of thought has been opened up to them. and they believe that they're on stage in front of an imaginary audience in which they believe that their thoughts are and their perception of themselves is what others perceive. So this will this will diminish later on, hopefully. But at this age, it's fresh, it's new, and they have very little experience with controlling it. So it's a and really very little experience with logical testing of these personal fables. So they can kind of run rampant at times. New skills are developed. So, like I said, they're able to manipulate more than one category at once. They're able to understand things from multiple levels. They're able to think hypothetically and think about changes over time. They're able to project, okay, if I do this, and then maybe that happens, and then maybe that happens, and blah, 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 and the snowball effect, and they can think in these terms now instead of, okay, I have to follow A, B, C in order to reach D. No, maybe I can go from A to B to D, skip over C, something like that. They can detect logical consistency or inconsistency. Now, like I said, they don't have a lot of practice in doing this at this point, so they're more prone to their own logical inconsistencies. And that's kind of one of the big roles of parents at this point, is kind of helping them navigate those inconsistencies of themselves. And relativistic thinking about self, world, and others, they're able to put themselves in the shoes of other people at this point, and frequently do, as evidenced by their egocentric thinking, because they think everybody's looking at them. All right, in terms of Erikson's theory, this stage is not part of Erikson's theory. Okay, so this particular stage was developed by researchers after Erikson as kind of an extension of his theory. So they kind of said, wow, adolescence is a really important time, and it's very rife with changes. Maybe just one stage isn't enough. Maybe we should split adolescence into two stages. Erikson only had one adolescent stage. And so in your book, this stage does not have a principle of social order or a ritualism. And John Gleason, in his book Growing Up to God, did not cover this stage because it didn't exist to Erikson. So researchers, though, have kind of expanded upon Erikson's theory to say, okay, at this point, you've got identity that is very important. They're trying to figure out who they are in terms of their social awareness. And so peer pressure is the big central process here. Now, let me make this very clear. Peer pressure, while it has a negative connotation in typical colloquialism, it is not necessarily negative in this sense. Peer pressure just means, okay, peers now have a higher level of influence upon the teen, the young adolescent, excuse me. The radius of significant relationships, obviously, then, is peers. The adaptive ego quality that comes from this is fidelity to others, loyalty, trusting others, connection with others, seeking others and seeking proximity to their peers. This is rewarding. It should be, at least. They should be able to find a group identity. They should be able to say to themselves, you know what, I'm a bookworm, so I go hang out with the other kids at the library. Or I'm a sports guy, so I'm going to go play baseball and be on the team and really identify with the team. Or I consider myself kind of artsy, so I'm going to hang out with the art group. Something like that. They find a group and they pull their sense of self from the group. But what happens then if they're rejected by the group? What happens if they have not developed a sense of trust versus mistrust? What happens if they have not developed a sense of autonomy or initiative or industry? All of those things that have led to this point may cause them to dissociate from other people. It may cause them to pull away. Maybe they feel guilty for some aspect about themselves. Maybe they feel like they're not worthy or worth other people's attention or time. Maybe they become a social recluse, or the guy who sits in the back of the class and is ignored by everybody, picked on, teased, bullied, whatever. They dissociate. They pull away. They may escape into fantasy in some way. That's a risk. And so that may follow them then into their future lives as adults and could be a problem for employment, relationships, marriage, any number of things. Now, principle of social order, ritualization, ritualism, and theological lesson, it's big question marks. I'm not going to test you on this, but I just have my own ideas of this. Perhaps the principle of social order could be acceptance. Perhaps they may understand the importance of group dynamics, something like that. Group dynamics, that could be a good principle of social order. Ritualization, ritualism, the positive aspect, maybe approach, but at the same time, the ritualism may be over-investment of oneself into another person or group. The theological lesson might be learning about communion, the importance of communing with other people. I don't know. These are my theories. You may have your own theory. I'd be interested to hear what you guys think about that. But this may be an area for future research if anybody is interested in expanding the field. So, previous researchers characterized, I believe it was G. Stanley Hall, who characterized adolescence as a period of storm and stress. And actually, when I taught this class last semester, there was an article in the APA journal, American Psychologist, that actually touched on this matter and said that adolescence can be a period of storm and stress, but it doesn't have to be a period of storm and stress. And it really rocked the boat as to the long-held contention that adolescence is full of strife and worry and pain. So, and it depends a lot, and I would encourage you, if you're interested, to look for that article. I'll see if I can find it, on adolescent storm and stress and how it is not necessarily as prevalent as we once thought. Relationships with parents are very important in terms of how the child or how the young adolescent assumes their roles. So, for instance, they may model what job they go after based upon what they see their parents working in. Perhaps they follow a clerical path, or perhaps a customer service or a retail path, because that's what their parents have done, and that's how they have made their money. That's the child's model of success, perhaps. And then, of course, peer pressure, and we've already talked about how that's not necessarily a negative quality. So what aspects do peers play strong roles in? So at this point, we've already talked about sex role behaviors, learning about social pressures and gender roles and things of that nature, and how teens and peers play a huge role in that. So the peer group can also provide a space for acceptance and belonging for the child, for the young adolescent. Um, a place where they can be themselves. Perhaps you think about a youth group experience that you may have had whenever you were an adolescent, or sports team that you were on, or something of that nature. A gaming community that you may have been a part of. Who knows? But it these people welcome them in and embrace them. Sometimes this can be negative, as as the young adolescent perhaps has a difficult time extricating themselves from the group eventually. But this is where at this point, this is where the group strength comes in, of creating sort of a foundation from which they develop an identity for themselves. They provide experience with equals and an opportunity to advance, really come into their sense of, I am cool, or I am, better at this than somebody else, and I'm the authority on this. Maybe I know how to hold the baseball bat at a better stance, and so maybe I can kind of help other people get that skill, and so I'm the expert at this, and so they feel good about themselves, for instance. Now, the thing about group dynamics is you have positive aspects and negative aspects. The group teaches by pressure. The group teaches by punishment or reward. If you ever take a social psychology class, you'll learn about something called normative or informative social influence. Normative social influence is what the group deems to be correct or right. Informative social influence is somebody in the group, perhaps the leader of the group, has a higher level of information or has the inside knowledge about some aspect of the group, and therefore is the leader. And if you rock the boat and you don't have enough social credits, let's say, if you don't have enough social repute in the group, you're more apt to be punished as opposed to having your ideas be accepted by the group. That's a freebie. Just take that in mind and, understand that this is how the group works and interacts with its members. So also keep in mind that the biggest area of group impact is where messages are unclear. So this goes back to where we talked about parents and how if their message is unclear, teens will be more than apt and more than ready to fill in those gaps with whatever nonsense they may have picked up from wherever they've come from. It's very much the blind leading the blind. That's why it's important for parents to have given strong, consistent messages. So, group characteristics. How do people conceptualize groups in their mind? So, they see things, the group has a representation. It's a cognitive aspect of the group. It's the meaning of the group. It's the what does this group mean to me at a personal level? Is this group important to me? Can I distance myself from the group? Is this the end-all, be-all of, groups, and I have to go to every meeting? Group operations. This is very much like what we were talking about with the rewards and punishments of the group. It's what the group does. It's its actions. Do we go out for, to the club every, weekend? It's just what we do, right? And if you don't want to go to the club, well, then you're out of the group. Something like that. And then thinking about the group, constant focus on the group dynamics. and they really, you'll see this in sort of how they talk. Oh, Gina and Cindy, they had this fight, and then, Georgina came in and she broke it up, and Georgina's just such a da 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 da, and so they are constantly thinking about how the group is operating, what the messages are, who's doing what with whom, and how are they, interacting, and it just is. It's their little soap opera in their heads. It's very egocentric. And what are the 4 factors of group identification? The group can categorize people and give them roles within the group. So you've got the leader, you've got the enforcer, you've got the the diplomat, you've got the person who gets things like that, and they assign roles in order to solidify the group dynamic. A sense of history is important. A sense that the group has always been, the group will always be, I am part of the group that will always be. And having that sense of group pride for having a history. And that talks to the emotional investment, the pride, the feeling of belonging, the feeling of acceptance, or the feeling of fear that you could at any moment be stricken from the group. And then social evaluations of one group to another, in-group versus out-group. I'm not like them. We are not like them. We are better than them. So you want to be in this group more than you want to go to that group. So that kind of wraps up this lesson for early adolescence. Like I said, we'll touch more on the spiritual aspect when we talk about later adolescence. But this is kind of a stage of great turmoil and shifting, but it doesn't have to be a time of storm and stress. So when I said turmoil, perhaps that was the wrong choice of words. But it is a great period of great transition. And this transition will continue to change as we move into later adolescence. So I hope that everybody is preparing themselves well for the midterm. I look forward to seeing how well everybody does. And if anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate to ask me. I'm available at any time for any question that you have. So until next time, I hope everyone has a great week and good studies.